Welcome back to the Restricted Handling Daily Intel Brief. This is what's been going on in Iran and the Middle East in the past 24 hours. President Donald Trump has threatened what he calls an economic D-Day against Iran and any country, bank, business, airport, or government entity that provides Tehran a lifeline. The language is sweeping. The implementation is not here yet. That gap is where the next major decision sits. A political threat changes risk calculations immediately. Banks, insurers, ports, refiners, and governments begin asking whether a transaction that was difficult yesterday becomes sanctionable tomorrow. An operational sanctions regime requires more. Treasury and Commerce need authorities, designations, deadlines, enforcement guidance, waivers, and a clear definition of what counts as support. Until those pieces arrive, Washington has announced a coercive direction rather than a complete economic architecture. China is the central credibility test. Iranian oil, shipping, payment, and logistics networks touch Chinese firms and other partners willing to tolerate American pressure. Aggressive secondary sanctions could force those entities to choose between Iranian business and access to dollar finance or American markets. Weak enforcement would tell Tehran that the campaign is another message to work around. The United Arab Emirates has already suspended trade with Iran after renewed missile fire, which removes an important commercial channel. That action came before the latest declaration and cannot carry a global campaign by itself. Iran's first response was defiant and deliberately economic. Foreign Minister Abbas Araghchi argued that the American threat was a diversion from rising federal debt and said economic coercion endangered the global economy and national sovereignty. Another senior diplomat predicted that economic war would fail just as military pressure had failed. Tehran wants its partners to see compliance with Washington as a surrender of their own sovereignty, not as a neutral choice about Iran. The Strait of Hormuz remains constrained, but the latest vessel data did not show a fresh collapse in daily traffic. Commodity movements were broadly similar to the previous day. Tracking gaps and ships operating without normal transponder signals make any precise count uncertain. Stability at a damaged level is still damage. War risk premiums, escorts, route uncertainty, and political control of access continue to distort shipping even when the number of transits does not fall again. The energy shock is also moving beyond crude oil. More than a fifth of regional refining capacity has reportedly been damaged or disabled during the conflict. Diesel and gasoline prices have jumped as the market absorbs that loss. Refineries cannot be replaced quickly, and product shortages reach trucking, agriculture, backup power, civilian transport, and military logistics. Inventories can hide the problem for a while, then expose it quickly. Watch refinery run rates, tanker insurance, and the price difference between crude and refined products. Those indicators will tell us whether the crisis is becoming structurally harder to reverse. Syria is now the sharpest arena for friction among countries that Washington wants to keep aligned. Israel struck the Abu al-Duher airbase after a Turkish delegation visited the site. Israeli officials say they were preventing a Turkish military deployment that would alter an understood security arrangement. Syria says the base was being prepared for its own air force and that Turkish officers were involved in training, not a permanent buildup. Turkey rejects Israel's explanation. This is a dispute over the future military order in Syria. Ankara wants to train and equip the new Syrian state. Israel wants to preserve freedom of action and prevent any independent or hostile military presence from taking shape near its operating space. American mediation now has to prevent two partners and Damascus from turning competing definitions of security into repeated strikes. A confirmed Turkish deployment or another Israeli attack would show that deconfliction is failing. In Gaza, the implementation mechanism has gained money without gaining an agreed sequence. American documents show roughly $206 million for an international stabilization force and associated vehicles. Several countries may contribute personnel, while Egypt and Jordan are involved in police training. That could create a force capable of deploying. It does not answer the decisive questions: Hamas disarmament, Israeli withdrawal, reconstruction, and the force's mandate are still arranged differently in each party's preferred timeline. Israeli strikes continued after recent diplomacy, deepening doubts that the plan can move to its next phase. A stabilization force that arrives before the parties agree on sequencing could find itself present without consent, authority, or a workable mission. Funding builds capacity. Political agreement determines whether that capacity can be used. Lebanon is drawing stronger allied criticism and more humanitarian support. A senior Canadian official called Israel's presence an unlawful invasion and said Canadian assistance to Lebanon this year would exceed 71 million Canadian dollars. The money will help vulnerable families, women, and displaced communities. It does not solve the security bargain. Israel says it will not withdraw until Hezbollah disarms. Lebanese authorities insist on sovereignty and the return of displaced residents. Aid can keep institutions and families functioning while diplomacy stalls, but it cannot enforce the sequence either side rejects. Inside Iran's official information environment, the economic threat is presented as another failed form of coercion. The message is that Washington exports instability and attacks every state that trades independently. Hormuz is framed as proof that Iran remains central to Gulf security and that the region is moving toward a multipolar order in which China and regional states reduce American primacy. Coverage of Israeli operations in Lebanon and Gaza sits beside diplomacy with Iraq and Pakistan. There is also a deliberate surrounding mix. Memorials, urbane travel, football, taekwondo, cultural events, and scenic domestic stories remain prominent. The effect is to present national life as durable and social cohesion as evidence that pressure failed. That narrative will matter if sanctions begin touching ordinary transactions more visibly. The next 24 hours should answer whether economic D-Day becomes an executable program. Look for formal designations, secondary sanctions guidance, and changes in Chinese or Iraqi payment and shipping behavior. In Hormuz, compare vessel counts with refinery output and insurance costs. In Syria, watch for another strike or a confirmed Turkish footprint. In Gaza and Lebanon, the decisive issue remains sequence. Who disarms, who withdraws, who deploys, and who can enforce the agreement. You've made it through another episode. Go do something kind, read something inconvenient, and keep a close eye on anyone who says they alone can save the country. The written brief is at restrictedhandling.substack.com.